Hello, welcome back to Elements Academy. I'm your host, James, and today we're going to be going over Section 6 of this course, Reissuing Assets. One of the main features of Elements is the ability to issue your own assets. So in this section, you'll learn how to reissue more of an asset that has already been created, and also how to destroy amounts of an issued asset. When creating more of an asset, it doesn't matter which node issued the asset in the first place, as long as the node that's reissuing an amount of an asset is in possession of what is commonly called the asset's reissuance token. We'll look at how to initially create the reissuance token, how to use it to reissue an amount of an asset, and also how to transfer the reissuance token to other nodes so that they also have permission to reissue the asset. We'll need access to two Elements nodes, which we'll call E1 and E2. The nodes have had their blockchains reset and the default asset split between them. In other words, this is the same setup that we've had in the previous tutorials. So, to reiterate, we have two nodes, E1, which we can access through E1 CLI. So if we type E1 CLI get blockchain info, that will query the E1 node. And we also have E2, which we can access using E2 CLI. Perfect. Right now, we'll have E1 issue an amount of 100 of a new asset and create one reissuance token for that same asset. We'll create the issuance as unblinded in order to simplify this example. So, let's go ahead and issue the asset and its associated reissuance token by typing E1 CLI issue asset, and then we want to issue 100 of this new asset. We want one reissuance token, and this third argument, we'll set it to false because we want the issuance to be unblinded. We don't want it to be blinded. Feel free to read the documentation of this issue asset RPC in order to see what more detailed explanations on what all these arguments mean. All right, now let's go ahead and run this command. Cool. What we see here is information about this issuance. Let's note the ID of the asset. So for now, to make the rest of this tutorial easier, let me put that into a variable. So we'll call that asset. Asset. And let's also note the transaction ID. So let's go ahead and put that into the transaction ID variable. Now the reason why we need this transaction ID is that we will later be reissuing more of this asset from E2. All right, let's first confirm this issuance transaction. So we can just do that by generating a block from E1. So let's generate one block. Perfect. Now we can check the transaction's details using the getTransaction command. So we'll type E1 CLI getTransaction, and we'll pass in this new TXID variable that we've created. And there's a lot of raw hex here, but what we can do is scroll up past all of this hex, and we can see all the outputs of this transaction. The two outputs that I want to take note of are these two. So first, we have an output here, which has an amount of 1, and this is the one reissuance token that we've created. And next, we have this output of amounts 100. The amount is 100. And this is the actual asset that we have created. Let's take note of this address that received the asset. And let's import that into E2's wallet so that E2 is also aware of the asset. Perfect. Now we can see all of E1's issuances with the list issuance RPC, list issuances. And we can see that it notes the initial issuance of the Bitcoin asset, but also an issuance of 100 of this new asset, which we have created. And we can run the same command for E2, and we can actually see the same thing on E2. We see the initial Bitcoin asset that was issued when the chain started, along with this new asset, which we have just issued. All right. So now both E1 and E2 are aware of this issuance. We should also take note of the fact that E1, let's type E1 get wallet info. E1 not only has the asset in its wallet, but it also has one reissuance token, which we've created, which is recorded here as a separate asset, along with some Bitcoin. And just keep in mind that this Bitcoin value goes down every time we make a transaction because a bit of it is automatically deducted by the wallet to pay for fees. Now note that if we type E2 CLI get wallet info, we actually only see the Bitcoin balance and we don't see any reissuance tokens. So currently only E1 has a reissuance token and only E1 is able to reissue amounts of this asset. So since E1 is able to reissue more of this asset with its reissuance token, let's go ahead and do that using the reissue asset command. So let's type E1 CLI reissue asset. We'll put in the asset ID, what was the name of the variable where I put that? Was it asset? Let's just confirm. Yes, that was called asset. Awesome. So let's go ahead and provide the asset ID. And then we need an amount to reissue. So let's go ahead and reissue 100 of this asset. So keep in mind that before this reissuance, when we ran E1 CLI get wallet info, E1 held 100 of this asset. Now let's go ahead and reissue it. And let's check the wallet information. Actually, let's go ahead and confirm this first by generating a block. And now let's go ahead and run get wallet info. And we can see right here that now E1 has 100 more of this asset. It has 200. So we've just reissued 100 more of this asset using this reissuance token. Now let's see what happens when we try to reissue this asset on E2. Keep in mind that E2 does not have a reissuance token. So let's run E2 CLI. Let's run the exact same command we just ran. However, let's run it on E2. What we'll see is that we get an error message. It indicates that this command could not execute because E2 does not have any available reissuance tokens in its wallet. Good. Now let's go ahead and list the issuances from E1 once again. Right here, we can now see that instead of 2, there is 3. So we see the initial Bitcoin issuance right here. We also see the initial 100 issuance of this asset. And note the is reissuance field here is set to false. But if we scroll down, we now see a third issuance here of 100 more of this asset. And here the is reissuance field is set to true. So this indicates that the second issuance of the asset was indeed a reissuance. Now, if we send E2 an amount of the reissuance token, they will actually be able to reissue an amount of this asset for themselves. To do this, first we'll need an address to send it to. But before proceeding, it's worth noting that the reissuance token is treated exactly the same as any other asset within Elements when sending and displaying balances, and that it can also be broken down to smaller denominations, just like any other asset. So, we don't need to send the full one reissuance token to E2 in order for it to be able to reissue the asset. Any denomination will suffice. So, what that means is we can actually just send a fraction of this token. Let's generate an address for E2 to receive this token with E2 CLI get new address. Perfect. We have this new address from E2. Let's copy it. Now, let's send a fraction of this reissuance token from E1 to E2 using the send to address command from E1. So, here we need the receiving address. Then let's say we only want to send 0.1 of this token instead of the full token. There are a lot of other arguments here that I won't get into, but just to keep this tutorial concise. But if you want to see what they mean, feel free to read the documentation for the send to address RPC. For now, let's just follow along and assume these are the arguments we want to provide. And the final argument is the ID of the reissuance token that we are using. So for that, let's go ahead and copy the asset ID of the reissuance token, which is right here. And let's use that. So, and the reason, by the way, why this token has an asset ID is because the token is treated like an asset, as I said. So let's go ahead and run that. Just before I run it, remember this is the address we're sending to, and this is the address of the reissuance token. All right. Oops, I think something went wrong. Let's see what went wrong. All right. I think what happened actually is I copied the asset ID for the Bitcoin reissuance token, of which we actually don't have any. Instead, I need to copy the token for the asset we've issued ourselves. So let me go ahead and rerun this command with that token reissuance token ID copied, and this should actually work. Perfect. So this outputs the transaction ID. And now what we need to do is confirm this transaction. So let's go ahead and confirm that. Awesome. Now let's check E2's wallet with E2 CLI get wallet info. And right now we see something interesting. Keep in mind, C6, D3, etc. is the ID of this reissuance token, which we just sent. Now we see that aside from the Bitcoin in E2's wallet, E2 also has 0.1 of this new asset, which is that reissuance token. What this means is that E2 can now reissue more of the asset which we issued in the beginning that is associated with this reissuance token. So let's actually go ahead and try that. To confirm that, by just having a fraction of this token, E2 can now actually issue some of this asset, reissue, whereas previously it could not. So let's go back to that command we were trying to run earlier. And how about we issue for E2? We can issue 500 of this asset, reissue. Perfect. So that seems to have worked. Let's go ahead and confirm that with E2 CLI, or it doesn't matter who generates the block, but somebody will generate it. So E2 CLI generate one block. Perfect. Now let's check E2's wallet with E2 CLI get wallet info. And right away we can see a new asset here. So it has its Bitcoin. The balance is a bit less than earlier because some of the Bitcoin were used for the fee of the reissuance transaction. We still have 0.1 of this reissuance token, and now we have 500 of the initial asset, which we have now reissued. This is quite exciting. Now that we have sent the reissuance token, E2 is also able to reissue. Something else that's cool is that by holding just the asset, anybody who holds an asset can destroy it as well. And destroying an asset is not governed by the reissuance token. Anyone who just holds the asset can do it. Let's go ahead and actually try to do that with the destroy amount RPC. So to do that, we need to copy the asset ID of the asset which we want to destroy. Well, actually, I already have this in the local asset variable, which we set at the start of the tutorial. So I'm going to pass that in, and then I will need to provide an amount to destroy. Let's say 100. So let me go ahead and execute that. That's the transaction ID of this destroy amount transaction. Let's go ahead and confirm that with E2 CLI generate 1. And now if I run E2 CLI get wallet info, I can see something interesting. Now this amount has been reduced by 100. It was previously, let's find it. It was previously 500. Then we destroyed 100 of this asset, and now E2 only has 400. All right. In this section, we've seen how to issue an asset, along with how to make use of the reissuance token that is optionally created as part of an asset issuance. We've also seen how transferring a reissuance token is as simple as transferring any other asset, and that holding any amount of a reissuance token grants the holder the right to issue more of the associated asset. It's therefore very important to control who has access to reissuance tokens in your network. We've also seen how to destroy an amount of an asset, and that this process is not controlled by the possession of the reissuance token. All right, that's all for section 6. See you soon.